Seeing beyond appearances. In the village of Crinklewood, everything was shaped by hand. The houses had thumbprint patterns on the walls, and the trees were made of twisted green coils. Peepa was a little girl made of bright orange clay who loved exploring every textured corner of her world. One sunny afternoon, Peepa met Leora. Leora was polished until she shone like a brand new marble. She wore a dress of shimmering silk clay and moved with a graceful glide. "She is the most beautiful person I've ever seen," Peepa whispered. "She must be a princess." Suddenly, a tiny clay sparrow fell into a pool of glop mud, the stickiest, bluest mud in the village. The bird chirped in distress, its wings heavy with slime. "Oh, help him!" Peepa cried. But Leora stepped back, shielding her shiny dress. "I can't get dirty," Leora snapped. "I have a party to attend." Just then, a heavy thud echoed through the lane. Craig appeared, looking like a mountain that had decided to walk. He was made of rough, gray stone clay, and his skin was covered in patches of fuzzy green moss. Peepa shivered and hid behind a fence, afraid of the giant. Craig didn't say a word. He didn't even look at his heavy gray feet as they stepped right into the sticky blue glop mud. He knelt down slowly, his joints creaking like old trees. He looked only at the tiny, shivering bird with eyes that were deep and steady. Peepa watched from behind the wooden fence. She expected the giant to be clumsy, but Craig's huge hands moved with the softness of a breeze. He reached into the mud, his face filled with worry for the little creature. He didn't seem to care that the blue slime was staining his mossy skin. With a gentle schloop, Craig lifted the sparrow. He blew softly on its wings to clear the mud and used a blade of clay grass to clean its beak. The bird chirped a happy thank you and flew into the sky. Craig was now covered in blue streaks, but his eyes sparkled with joy. Leora marched over, looking horrified. "Look at you," she laughed nastily, pointing at the blue stains. "You're a mess. You're just a big, ugly lump of mud and moss. You don't belong in a beautiful place like Crinklewood. You're ruining the view." Peepa couldn't stay quiet any longer. She ran out and stood beside Craig, taking his muddy hand in hers. "Stop it, Leora," Peepa shouted. "Craig is the most beautiful person here because he helped when you wouldn't. Mud washes off, but mean words stay forever." Peepa and Craig spent the rest of the day sharing a snack by the river. Peepa realized that you can't see someone's heart just by looking at their skin. From that day on, she looked for the beauty in people's actions, and she found that Craig was the brightest spark in all of Crinklewood. Responsibility builds freedom. In the heart of the hollow, a village made of soft clay and moss, Arlo looked up at the great sky basket. It was a giant wicker kite that carried mail across the rolling hills. "I want to fly it," Arlo chirped, his eyes wide. Burl, the wise village keeper, smiled softly. "To fly high, Arlo, one must first learn to stand firm on the ground. Freedom is earned, one small task at a time." Burl handed Arlo a small pouch and a tiny, carved wooden rake. "Before the sky basket, you must care for the sunseed patch," Burl explained. "These seeds need water every morning at sunrise. It is a small job, but the village depends on these flowers for light. If you can handle this, we will see what comes next." On the first day, Arlo watered the seeds perfectly. But on the second day, his friends called to him from the river to play pebble toss. The seeds can wait just an hour, Arlo thought. He dropped his watering can in the tall clay grass and raced away, leaving his chores behind for the thrill of the game. When the sun began to set, Arlo returned to the patch. His heart sank. The sun seeds were brown and droopy, their tiny sprouts curling away from the dry earth. The dirt was cracked and thirsty. Arlo felt a heavy lump in his chest. He realized that by choosing to play, he had let the flowers down. Arlo found Burl sitting by the village fire. He didn't make excuses or blame the heat. "I went to play and forgot the seeds," Arlo whispered, hanging his head. Burl nodded slowly. "Honesty is the first step of responsibility, Arlo. It shows you are brave enough to own your mistakes. Now, what will you do to fix it?" Arlo didn't give up. He spent the next week tending to the patch with more care than ever. He even made a checklist on a flat, smooth stone. Every morning, before the birds finished their first songs, Arlo ensured the soil was damp and cool. He stayed until every leaf was straight and strong. Soon, the sunseed patch exploded into a riot of golden light. The flowers hummed with energy, glowing so brightly they lit up the entire corner of the village. Arlo felt a new kind of pride, the kind that doesn't come from winning a game, but from finishing a hard job well. Burl walked by and saw the glowing garden. "You have earned my trust," he said, placing a hand on Arlo's shoulder. "Because you cared for the seeds, I know you can handle the water wheel. It is a bigger job that requires you to travel to the edge of the forest. I won't be there to watch you, because I know you will do what is right." Arlo managed the wheel perfectly. He checked the gears and cleared the moss every single day. Because he proved he was reliable, Burl didn't have to check on him anymore. Arlo found that his responsibility gave him the freedom to explore the woods and choose his own path, as long as the water kept flowing. Finally, the big day arrived. Burl led Arlo to the great sky basket and handed him the steering ropes. "You proved you could handle the small things, so now you can handle the big ones," Burl said as the kite caught the wind. Arlo realized that responsibility wasn't a weight that held him down. It was the very thing that gave him wings. Forgiveness frees the heart. In the bright, textured village of Cobbleclay Valley, Soren was the happiest maker of all. He had spent all week molding a magnificent bird out of the rarest rainbow clay. It had wings that looked like sunset and a beak as bright as a lemon. Soren held it gently, his heart full of pride. While Soren was showing his bird to the flowers in the garden, his friend Flint came zooming by on a heavy clay scooter. Flint was going too fast and wasn't watching where he was going. With a loud thud and a crunch, the scooter hit Soren, and the rainbow bird flew into the air, landing in 100 tiny pieces. Flint looked at the mess and then at his scooter. "You shouldn't have been standing in the path," Flint said with a shrug, and he scooted away without saying sorry. Soren felt a hot, prickly feeling in his chest. Suddenly, a heavy, dull gray stone appeared in his hands. It was a grudge stone, born from his anger. Soren tried to go inside for his lunch, but the grudge stone was growing. By the time he reached the kitchen, it was as big as a watermelon. He had to use both arms to carry it. It was cold, lumpy, and very, very heavy. He tried to eat his soup, but the stone sat in his lap, making it impossible to reach the table. Later, Soren went to the park to see his friends on the swings. He wanted to fly high into the air, but the grudge stone wouldn't let him. It sat on his feet like an anchor. While the other children laughed and soared, Soren sat on the grass, trapped by the weight of his own bitterness. An old woman named Maud walked by, carrying a basket of silver yarn. She saw Soren struggling and sat down on a nearby bench. Maud was the wisest person in Cobbleclay Valley. She knew all about the things that weigh a heart down. She looked at the giant gray stone and sighed softly. "That looks like a very heavy burden you've made, Soren," Maud said gently. Soren frowned. "I didn't make it. Flint broke my bird and didn't even care." "This stone belongs to him." Maud nodded. "Flint did something wrong, and it's okay to be sad. But Flint isn't the one carrying the stone. You are." Soren looked at the stone. He realized that as long as he stayed angry at Flint, the stone would only get bigger. "But if I forgive him, doesn't that mean what he did was okay?" Soren asked. Maud shook her head. "No, Forgiving doesn't make the wrong thing right. It just means you don't want to carry the weight of it anymore. Soren took a deep breath. He thought about the broken bird, and then he thought about how much he missed running and swinging. I forgive him, Soren whispered. Not because the bird is fixed, but because I want to be light again. As he spoke, the grudge stone began to glow and crumble into soft, colorful dust. Soren felt as light as a feather. He walked over to where Flint was sitting by the broken pieces of the bird. Flint looked guilty now. I'm sorry, Soren, Flint mumbled. Soren smiled. He knew they had a lot of work to do to fix the bird, but his heart was finally free to help. Curiosity leads to wisdom. In the village of Dull Hollow, everything was exactly as it had always been. The houses were molded from gray clay, and the sky was a permanent shade of oatmeal. Ponder stood by the great wall, holding a heavy brush dripping with slate-colored paint. Every Tuesday, the villagers painted the wall gray, because that was the Tuesday rule. Ponder looked at his brush, then at the wall, and felt a strange itch in his brain. Why do we paint the wall every week? Ponder asked a tall neighbor named Glim. Glim stopped mid-stroke, his clay brow furrowing in deep concentration. He looked at the wall, then at his own brush, and finally back at Ponder. Because the Tuesday rule says so, Glim replied with a slow nod. It has always been gray, so it must always stay gray. He turned back to his work, content with his answer, but Ponder's itch only grew stronger. Ponder decided to look for a different answer. He wandered to the edge of the village, where the clay ground turned from gray to a dusty brown. There, partially buried beneath a heavy indigo-colored stone, he spotted the corner of something unusual. He knelt down, digging with his clay fingers until he pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. It wasn't gray at all. It was etched with symbols that pulsed with a faint, golden light. Ponder carried the heavy book up the winding path to the highest hill. This was where Verity lived. She was the oldest soul in the land, with hair like silver wire and eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 stories. She was sitting on a bench made of smoothed driftwood when Ponder arrived, breathless. I found this, he gasped, holding out the book. I want to know why the wall is gray, and I think this knows. Verity didn't open the book immediately. Instead, she looked at Ponder and smiled. The book will tell you many things, Ponder, but wisdom doesn't come from just reading. It comes from asking the right questions and refusing to look away until you understand the how and the why. She tapped the cover. This is the Journal of the First Makers. It describes the great machine that keeps our world moving. Verity led Ponder to the center of the village, to a tower that everyone had ignored for centuries. It was covered in thick, gray vines. The wall is gray because the great machine inside this tower has stopped, Verity explained. When the machine stops, the color fades, and people forget to wonder. They follow rules because they have forgotten how to dream. Ponder looked at the tower and saw a small, rusted door at the base. Ponder didn't just walk away. He crawled through the tiny door and found himself inside a forest of giant copper gears and brass pipes. Everything was silent and coated in thick gray dust. He didn't just look at the mess, he began to trace the pipes with his hands, feeling where they were cold and where they were blocked. He asked himself, if steam moves here, where does it go next? He was learning the logic of the machine. Near the very top of the central pillar, Ponder saw the problem. A single jagged pebble, vibrant red and hard as diamond, was wedged between two of the largest teeth of the main drive gear. It had been there so long that the gears had started to grow around it. Ponder realized that the Tuesday rule was just a way to hide the fact that the world had broken. He grabbed a heavy wrench from the floor and prepared to pry it loose. With a loud crack, the pebble popped out. Ponder watched as it fell into the darkness below. Suddenly, the tower began to hum. The gears groaned, shuddered, and then started to spin with a rhythmic, musical clacking. Deep within the pipes, a warm glow began to pulse. Verity, watching from the doorway, saw the first spark of blue light travel up the tower walls like a racing heartbeat. As the machine roared to life, the gray paint on the great wall began to peel away, revealing a kaleidoscope of colors beneath. The villagers dropped their brushes in shock. Ponder climbed down, his clay hands covered in grease and gold dust. Glim approached him, looking at a newly sprouted purple flower. "Why is it that color?" Glim asked. Ponder smiled, handing him a small tool. "I don't know yet," Ponder said. "Let's find out together." The importance of truth. In the heart of Pebble Village, everything was molded from bright, colorful clay. The houses were round like teapots, and the trees had leaves of green felt. Bax, a curious boy with a knitted scarf, loved visiting the workshop of the village elder Silas. One afternoon, Bax spotted something shimmering on a high shelf, a jar made of sky blue glass, filled with golden light. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Bax knew he wasn't supposed to touch the jar, but he just wanted to feel its smooth surface. As he reached out, his foot slipped on the stool. The stool wobbled, and Bax gasped as the blue jar slid off the shelf. It hit the floor with a sharp clink, shattering into 100 glittering pieces. The golden light inside flickered and went out. Just then, Silas walked into the room. He saw the mess and looked at Bax with a sad, confused face. "Oh no," Silas said softly. "My jar of morning light." "How did this happen, Bax?" Bax felt a cold shiver in his tummy. He didn't want Silas to be mad at him. "The window was open," Bax stammered. "A big gust of wind blew it over." As soon as the lie left Bax's mouth, something strange happened. A small, sticky blob of purple clay appeared on Bax's shoulder. It was heavy and smelled like old socks. Bax tried to brush it off, but it stuck fast. He looked at Silas, but Silas didn't seem to see the purple blob at all. He only looked disappointed at the open window. Later that day, Bax met his friend Micah near the village well. Micah noticed Bax was walking a bit crookedly. "Are you okay, Bax?" Micah asked. Bax didn't want to explain the purple blob, so he told another lie. "I'm just carrying a heavy bag of invisible rocks," he said. Suddenly, the purple blob on his shoulder doubled in size. The lie was growing. By dinner time, it wasn't just on his shoulder. It was wrapped around his chest like a heavy blanket. It was hard to breathe, and it was hard to play. Every time Bax thought about the broken jar, the purple blob grew prickles that poked him. He felt very lonely, even though the village was full of people. The next morning, Silas found Bax sitting by the river. Silas looked worried. "The village feels dim without the jar of morning light," Silas said. "I wish I knew exactly how it fell so I could make a stronger shelf. Was the wind really that strong, Bax?" Bax looked at Silas's kind eyes and felt the purple blob get even heavier, pinning him to the ground. Bax tried to walk away, but the lie was too big now. It had grown a mouth and was whispering all the lies Bax had told back into his ear. It blocked his path like a giant, sticky wall. He realized that the lies weren't protecting him. They were trapping him. He couldn't move forward until he told the truth. Bax turned back to Silas. "It wasn't the wind," he shouted. "I touched it, Silas. I broke it because I was curious, and I lied because I was scared." As the words came out, the purple blob began to shrink. With every true word, it got smaller and smaller until it turned into a puff of purple smoke and vanished completely. Bax felt light as a feather. Silas wasn't angry. He gave Bax a big, warm hug. "Thank you for the truth, Bax," Silas said. "Glass can be mended, but trust is harder to fix. By being honest, you fixed our trust." Together they went back to the workshop and began to glue the blue pieces back together, making the jar even more beautiful than before. It's called Treasured Stories for Kids. Hey! Growth takes time. In the village of Stony Brook, everyone was a maker. Young Flint wanted to be the greatest maker of all. He spent every morning in the workshop of Master Bram, watching the old man turn lumps of gray earth into soaring eagles and dancing lions. "How do you do it so fast?" Flint asked, his eyes wide with wonder. Master Bram just smiled, his fingers never stopping their rhythmic dance. Flint decided he would make a masterpiece by lunchtime. He dragged a heavy, wet slab of cobalt blue clay onto his workbench. It was cold and smelled like rain. He didn't want to start with something small. He wanted to start big. He imagined a dragon with scales as sharp as glass and a tail that could whip the wind. Flint grabbed a heavy wooden mallet. Whack! Thump! Smash! He swung with all his might, trying to force the clay into the shape of a wing. But the clay didn't want to be a wing yet. It groaned and slumped, turning into a flat, sad pancake that oozed over the edges of the table. Flint slumped too, his shoulders heavy with disappointment. Master Bram walked over, his clay-stained hands holding a single, tiny acorn made of terracotta. He set it down next to Flint's messy blue pancake. "The mountain wasn't built in a morning, little one," Bram whispered kindly. Flint sighed and looked at the tiny, perfect acorn. "But I want my work to be beautiful right now," he replied. Bram led Flint to the back of the studio, to a dusty shelf hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. On it sat rows of lumpy, cracked, and unrecognizable shapes. "These were my first tries," Bram said, pointing to a lopsided bird. "I kept them to remind me that every master was once a disaster. It takes 1,000 tiny touches to make one great thing." Flint took a deep breath and cleared away the blue pancake. He took a new piece of clay, no bigger than a walnut. He sat quietly for a long time, just feeling the cool texture between his fingers. He didn't use the mallet this time. Instead, he just rolled the clay into a smooth, perfect sphere. It was small, but it was a start. Days turned into weeks. Flint returned to the workshop every afternoon. He wasn't trying to make a dragon anymore. He was making a tiny sparrow. He used a thin silver needle to etch the tiniest lines into the wings, one feather at a time. Sometimes his hands slipped, and he had to smooth the clay out and try again. He didn't mind the waiting anymore. One afternoon, Bram leaned over Flint's shoulder. The sparrow was almost finished, its beak slightly open, as if it were about to sing. "Look at the curve of that tail," Bram noted with a proud nod. Flint realized that by taking his time, he had noticed things he never saw before, the way feathers overlap and the way a bird balances. Finally, the sparrow was ready. It had been fired in the hot kiln and painted the color of the morning sky. Flint held it in his palms, feeling its solid weight. It wasn't a giant dragon, but it was perfect. He had learned that his hands were capable of magic, as long as his heart was patient enough to wait for it. Flint and Bram sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills, turning the sky into a palette of orange and purple. The village was quiet. Flint looked at his sparrow, then at Bram's great lion. He knew he had a long way to go to reach the master's skill, but he wasn't in a hurry anymore. He was a maker, and he had all the time in the world. Helping without being asked. In the sun-drenched town of Pebblebrook, Silas had a very special talent. He didn't have super strength, and he couldn't fly through the clouds. Instead, Silas had what his teacher called wide-open eyes. He noticed the little things that everyone else seemed to walk right past. One afternoon, Silas saw his neighbor, Beatrice, kneeling in her garden. She was patting the soil with her hands, her brow furrowed in a worried frown. She was looking for something, but the tall clay sunflowers were blocking her view. Silas didn't wait for Beatrice to call out. He noticed a silver glint near the watering can. He reached down into the soft clay soil, picked up her lost spectacles, and gently held them out. Beatrice's face lit up with a giant, toothy smile. Later, Silas walked toward the town square. He saw Otis, the town's handyman, struggling with a heavy wooden ladder and a bucket of blue paint. Otis was huffing and puffing, trying to balance everything while the wind blew his hat across the grass. Silas didn't ask if Otis needed help. He simply caught the hat and then stood by the base of the ladder, holding it steady with both hands so it wouldn't shake. Otis looked down and gave Silas a grateful wink as he began to paint the park bench. When Silas got home, he found his mother, Mabel, in the kitchen. She was trying to stir a big pot of soup while also reaching for a heavy stack of bowls on a high shelf. The kitchen was busy and filled with the smell of clay-molded carrots and onions. Silas didn't wait to be told what to do. He pulled a sturdy stool across the floor, climbed up, and carefully handed the bowls down to the counter one by one. Mabel sighed with relief, her shoulders relaxing as the job became much easier. In the living room, Silas's little brother Milo was sitting on the rug. Milo was trying to build a tall tower out of blocks, but the rug was bumpy, and the tower kept falling over. Milo's lower lip began to tremble as the blocks tumbled again. Silas didn't wait for the crying to start. He found a flat wooden board and slid it onto the rug to create a smooth, level floor. Then, he helped Milo place the first 3 blocks. "Try it now," Silas whispered. Milo beamed and started stacking higher than ever before. That night, as Mabel tucked him in, she told him how much his wide-open eyes had helped everyone. Silas realized that you don't need a reason to be kind, and you don't need an invitation to help. You just have to look, see a need, and jump right in.